Hey guys, my name is Russ, or Nachum Russell, but nobody can say that, so I became Russ. And this is my friend Terry Harris of West Tennessee Canine.
Hello.
And for those of you who haven't watched this show yet, it's a very free-flowing show. We talk about dogs, we talk about anything. It's a lot of fun. But if you do have any questions, comments, or topics that you want us to touch on, just post them up in the comments and we'll be sure to get them as we go. So Terry owns West Tennessee Canine. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your training, where you are, what you do, and all that?
Yeah, we're in Memphis, Tennessee. We get dogs from all over. Have dogs from Ohio, Texas, all over Florida. But we're located in Memphis, Tennessee. The great part about that is we're kind of centrally located everything. So we have a big circle around us that we draw from. I started out doing mainly protection work, a lot of working dogs. Our company started, and then the logo's all fancy, and it looks working-ish because we started out as a private security company with dogs. So it's really hard to make a living doing that. So I started training pet dogs to supplement my income. And then that just took off. We use a lot of the working dog stuff that I would use for my working dogs, and we use it for pet dog training as far as building drive, that type of thing, and get the dogs really working for us. But we do a lot of behavior modification, a lot of just great, easy dogs. We have a 4,000 square foot training center here in Memphis, and absolutely love it.
Cool. So I'm gathering that you've been training dogs for a lot longer than you've been training family dogs, meaning you've been working with dogs for a long time. When did you actually start being a dog trainer?
My first memory of training a dog was probably when I was started about 10 or 11 years old. We raised and trained hunting dogs, lots of hunting dogs. That's where I started, and kind of my working dog background. And then when I was probably 13, 14 years old, maybe, I started just grabbing neighborhood dogs where people had problems with them, whether it be aggression. Didn't think anything of it and just started training dogs. So I've pretty much my whole life. So I'm 40. How old am I now? 48? Yes. 48 now. So I've been training dogs since I was probably 12, 13 years old.
Cool. So coming from a working dog background, so for those who are watching who don't understand the difference between working dog and pet dog training, you want to touch on that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people here are just regular family pet dogs, and then you say working dog, and it's like, what does that mean? Is my dog a working dog? So what is the difference between a working dog and a pet dog?
So a working dog means they have a purpose and they earn you something. So hunting dogs, they want to work. Our hunting dogs were not pets. I mean, they were our pets, but they weren't in the house. They had a specific job to do, and they were bred to do this thing. With our working dogs, personal working dogs, we did private security, so they did patrol work, detection work. Working dog is when the dog has a job, has a purpose, as far as earning you income. They were our pets, but they weren't in the house. There you go. They had a specific job to do, and they were bred to do this thing. I don't know. What have you going on here in the background? There you go. The new laptop, I don't know how to turn the volume down. So, that's the difference between working dogs and pet dogs. And when you're dealing with working dogs, working type dogs, and even working breed dogs, the drive to work is extreme. So the want to do something is on the higher end, and that's what we look for in the working lines.
So you were, before working with pet dogs, you were specializing in security dogs. So that would be things like bite work and those types of things. Were you hired out by people?
Yes. I was really the only handler. We did protection work, so we trained dogs to be personal protection dogs. But with West Tennessee Canine, we went to high-risk apartment complexes. We were contracted by them to go in and clean them up, keep people moving, and just people don't like dogs, so we would just kind of descend on the complexes for about 3 weeks, get everybody moving along, work in conjunction with the police department, giving them information on who was doing what, where, and then once that one kind of got cleaned up, we'd move to the next one, then we'd start over again. So, yeah.
Gotcha. That's cool. That's very cool. I never knew that there was. I always thought it was just the police would do that. I never knew that was like a privately contracted business as well. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the thing about being privately contracted is that the police can come on the properties, and keep in mind these were giant apartment complexes in really bad areas. So the police can come on the properties if they are called for a crime, or if there's suspicion of a crime, or they see something going on. So they just can't come onto the properties and descend. They can't just patrol the property with a police dog. They don't have the right to do that. But
Right.
since the property owners would hire us, we had the right to enter. We had the right to be on the property. We had permission from them. So we had a lot more rights on the property than the actual police department did.
So you were kind of just hanging out there and making a presence, like making it known that you're there for a lot of your time.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
And they didn't. I mean, as far as the people we worked for, or as far as the tenants in the property complex, it just said K9 unit. They didn't know who we were, what we were doing. So just that presence there in the dogs, and my patrol dogs are Dobermans, and they look rough anyway, look intimidating, and it's just a presence. It's just a visual thing. As far as law enforcement, we had zero authority to do anything. We call the police for that, but it was the presence of us being there.
So when did you make that shift from, like, I know you don't really do much working dog stuff right now. You're primarily a pet dog trainer. When did you make that shift, and what made you decide to make that shift?
It was about 5 years ago. Right at 5 years ago. And the risk outweighed the reward. It's hard to make a living doing that, especially solo, without having a lot of dogs. And folks liked the idea of being on the property with dogs, but they didn't like to pay for it. So it was getting hard to charge for the danger that you're putting yourself in. And you could only be at one property at a time. And so you're very limited on your income and very limited of what you could do.
So you mentioned in the beginning that a lot of what you learned or would work with the working dogs in order to train them, you now incorporate into your pet dog training. What does that look like? How do you incorporate that in? What have you taken from that world of training, which is a very different style of training than a lot of pet training? What have you taken from that you now use with pet dogs?
Primarily the drive stuff. So when I talk about drive, the dog's wantingness and willing to work for you. Now, we do get a lot of dogs that are shut down and this doesn't work with, but for the most part, this works. I want the dog to, let me back up just a little bit. So, with e-collar training, especially with e-collar training, you're teaching a dog a switch on and off. Mm-hmm. Like, this is how you turn this off. And the dog performed for you to turn that pressure off. And so what I do is add motivation, whether it be toy, affection, food. I pair that with the e-collar and get the dog working for that feeling. If that makes sense. Yep. And so when you're working recall, working sits, and working all that stuff, and the e-collar's paired with it, you can have dogs wanting and willing to perform for you and not shut down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're kind of taking that. Well, from my understanding, I never really did much working dogs. My extent of working dog training was I took a weekend and I went and got a bunch of bites, and it was a lot of fun, but I never did the training aspect of it. I just did some decoy work. But from what I understand of it is that working dog training, you're building up a lot of drive and doing less shutting off. It's primarily turning the dog on, and you're able to use that to bring pet dogs out of their shell and motivate them in a similar way as how you would, obviously not to the same extent as a working dog, because you don't want that full-on craziness, but you want them to be alive. You want them to be performing because they want to, not just because they have to.
Correct. And the thing with our dogs we use for security and our personal protection dogs, they had their obedience and ability to be around people had to be top notch. So
Right.
it's a little different when you're working with police dogs and things like that. Their primary role is to apprehend, to protect the police officer. So there's a lot more grace there as far as accidental bites, all that stuff. We didn't have that grace, so the obedience part of what we did had to be as good as the ability to bite and hold or whatever we were asking to do. So turning the dog off, getting the dog to stop biting, or getting the dog to stop going after somebody and turn around and come straight back to you was important. And keep in mind when the dogs are working, like there are no prong collars on them, there are no e-collars on them. They're working, so they have to be so good that when you tell them to no, when you say no, they just freeze. And then okay, what are you asking me to do then? Because a lot of times, something will surprise you and the dog will get set off and you have to shut them down like that. Because like I said, if there's an accidental bite, we don't have the grace that law enforcement does.
Right. So a common question that I think that I've seen, I haven't been in dog training close to as long as you, but a common question that I see that's discussed is using working dog training for pet dog training, where a lot of people will say, well, the whole idea of working dog training is to teach a dog to turn on, and the idea of pet training is to teach a dog to shut off more, to be more relaxed, and that using working dog training can get you the opposite effect of what you want out of pet dog training. Do you see that at all? Is that a concern of yours?
I really don't see that, because the thing is you are teaching the dog an on and off switch. But a good example is the way I use the word no. No just means stop what you're doing, but not only stop what you're doing, but look at me. So no means no, stop. What are you asking me to do? Instead of just no being a turnoff word, right. No is a very interactive thing. No, dog looks. What are you asking me to do? Down. So I don't think that building the dog's drive up affects that much at all. And because of what we did in the past, we get a lot of really energetic, drivey dogs. And we still work a lot of duration work. We still do a lot of things to bring that together. And I don't think that it sends the dogs off the charts, because it definitely is through repetition, a handler driven command.
Right. So I like that idea of using no as opposed to no meaning just shut off completely. More like no means stop what you're doing and redirect to me so I can give you guidance now as to what you should do next. I think that's a very cool way of explaining it and a cool way of working it, because to many people, no just means just stop everything altogether. Right. And then you kind of, every time you stop a dog from doing something, it's like a reset. And as opposed to what you're doing is like, don't shut off, don't shut down, don't stop being excited to be here or being excited to work, but just that specific thing was not what you should be doing, and let me show you a better option instead. It's a very clear way of teaching a dog.
It is, and it's not incredibly hard. When you start to teach the no command, which is right away, no, and then you give pressure, the dog looks at you, yes, reward.
Right. And especially
not that, but this. Okay, what are you asking me to do? We're teaching the dogs how to deal with pressure, and the no word has to have a lot of pressure and associated you with no pressure. Nothing else around you needs to matter.
Especially the way that, just following up on what you're saying, especially the way that you're using the e-collar, which is essentially teaching the dog that you want its attention, right? So that pressure, which if you're using the e-collar pressure to match up with the word no, which I'm guessing that's what you meant by pressure, then it's a very easy thing for the dog to hear the word no, feel the pressure, and redirect towards you, because they're already conditioned to know that pressure, and really any pressure, even if it's leash pressure, means that the handler is talking to you. So go look towards them to see what they want. So it's like no, a little higher level pressure because it's a serious pressure. It's the no, but redirect because you know that no, that pressure means to look at the handler, and you'll automatically have a dog who starts to look towards you when he hears that he should stop doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. But we start everything with the leash. Even the e-collar dogs start out strictly on the leash, because the leash is that very visual, very physical tie. So when I say no and I give that leash pressure, little pop, whether it be direct pressure, the dog can turn around, look right up the leash at me, know exactly where things are coming from, and know exactly where the reward's going to be. At the end of the leash, there's going to be pressure. There's on the dog's neck toward me, nothing but reward.
Yeah, so a while back on your page, I saw a really good post. I don't remember if it was a video or a written post, but you were saying how every dog that comes into your program, even if they've been through other trainers, which you get a lot of dogs that have been to other trainers, that the first thing you do is you just put a regular slip lead on them and just make sure that they actually understand what leash pressure means. Because without that simple understanding of leash pressure and how to turn off that leash pressure and how to yield to it, you don't have that foundation for everything else to be built on. I think that's a very important one that a lot of people miss, is like the leash is not necessarily a restraining tool, which is the way the average owner uses it. It's a training tool, and it's meant to communicate with the dog. And if you don't have that basic level of communication, it's going to be a lot harder to build everything else up that you want to get out of it.
Absolutely. And we get a lot of dogs that have been through strictly e-collar programs, that the collar on, they're really good. The collar off, they're horrible. First thing I do, like you said, is I put just a slip lead on them, and right out of the gate, I know if they understand. If I'm right out of the gate, I know if they understand or not. If I'm the one giving you information, you pay attention to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And not teaching you to just turn a collar off. Like dog training is a very personal thing with people. It's a very, very personal thing with dogs. The dogs need to understand this is where you're going to get your information from me over here, the guy on the end of the leash. And it doesn't matter if you see a remote collar in my hand, or you feel a prong collar in your neck, just a slip lead or a flat buckle collar. You know, I've only been training with training tools, e-collars and prong collars, for about 4 years. Like even until about probably 5 years ago when I went to T3, I had no idea there was a positive world and a balanced world. I had zero clue. I was totally just like, what? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And there are people fighting about this. I don't understand. You know, but before that, it was just slip leads and reward and punishment. Like you did it all through a leash. So it's very important the dog has that relationship. You're building that relationship, and you do that through communication with that leash.
So I love everything you're saying. I have one question on that. So when you're sending a dog home who's been trained like the way you're saying, right, which is that the leash is important and communicating through that, and it's not just about the e-collar, how do you transfer that to an owner where the owner, or do you tell the owner, I guess two parts to this question, do you tell the owner to always use the e-collar, or is it the dog should still listen to you without the e-collar, but the e-collar is a great way of helping with this as well?
So this causes me a little more work, but I continue to do it this way because at this point in my career and life, I think it's the right thing to do. They have 2 go-home sessions. In the first one, we don't even get into the e-collar at all. They have some videos on it. Some people go home with it. Some people don't. For 2 weeks, I have them just use the leash. Because, and like I said, it causes me more work, but I'd very rarely get dogs back that are collar wise, because when you're teaching the client pressure through the leash with the remote collar, it's like a remote control. And no matter how much you try to explain that away, it's not a remote control. People still think, well, if you're not doing what I'm asking you to do, I just turn it up. Right. And if the dog's not clear on what you're asking it to do, then what are you really doing? But with that leash, when the people can feel the pressure and they can feel how hard they're having to correct, and if they're having to correct this for the same thing over and over again with that leash, then the dog's probably not understanding what they're asking them to do. And it alleviates a lot of that confusion on the dog. Because what I found out a lot when people go home just with the e-collar for the most part, they'll either get frustrated and not do it, or it'll just be on the dog when they're bad. And so for 2 weeks, they go home with just leash and prong. And we do a lot of slip lead work, or dominant dog collar, slip collars in that go home session too. And so they can feel the difference in the pressures, and they can really feel what it's taking for that dog to respond to them, if that makes sense.
That's very cool. What I like about that is that you're you're kind of making the owner work for it, which I think that, so I've done in my short span of dog training career, I've done one-on-ones and I've also done board and trains. And I think that each one has its pros and cons. I think one of the things that are not necessarily so good about board and trains, although we as trainers can get amazing results, but that the client doesn't see or feel all of the work that went into that necessarily. And when they're not putting in that work, they're not going to necessarily do the same things to keep it up because they don't see, they didn't actually not just see it, because even if you show it all on social media, right? Like most of us try to show a lot of work. Even if you show it, they're not feeling it. They didn't actually put that work into it.
Right.
But what you're doing is like you're setting the foundation. You're putting in a lot of the work for them. So when the dog goes back home, it's a lot smoother. But then you're still saying, now take the dog home and for 2 weeks work it, and like work for that, the results that you really want out of it for 2 weeks, work for it, and then we'll move you on to that next stage. So that's a very cool idea. I've never heard of anyone doing that.
And the dog knows, I mean, the dog already knows the stuff. So it's not like the dog's going backwards. And it's just that the owner is really starting to understand communication and relationship more than anything.
Right.
And I was going somewhere with that. And I forgot where it was. It's been a long day.
It allows them, well, it allows them to build that relationship that you've built with the dog without relying on anything other than really just relationship and very basic training stuff. Like a leash, although you can do a ton with a leash, it's a basic thing that technically really anyone can do. Obviously there's an art to it, but it allows them to put that work in and really feel what it is. And I think that it makes it more valuable for the owner in the long run. Like the dog can be just as trained, like probably either way, but it makes it more valuable for the owner in the long run, where they know, because they had that 2-week period of really rebuilding things and having to work for it a bit. It's like now 2 months, 3 months, 4 months later, they're going to be less likely to just drop it all because they understand what it took to get it, because they were a part of that process.
Yeah. And you know, one of my favorite things to do, this is something that really kind of bothered me when I started watching people's social media and watching before and after videos or how-to videos, and then doing go-home sessions. Like at the beginning of every go-home session is a mess.
Yes.
Like it is. And so I'm like, I'm gonna take that mess and I'm gonna use it to work with the client. So when I bring the dogs out, I bring them out just on a slip lead, and I work them through, and you know, we're in a training environment. They've been there for, you know, 1 to however many weeks, and so they calm down pretty quickly just with a slip lead. And then we do the greeting, and I put the leash in the owner's hands, and what do you think happens? Just a slip lead.
Crazy,
like,
right?
The dog goes crazy. The dog's all over them. The dog's jumping on them, and you see their face like, oh my gosh, I just wasted all this money. Because I want them to understand, like the training tools, they get you to the end quicker. Like you go from the beginning and you do good, you feed the puppy and you teach them to sit, and then the trainer fast forwards you to the end with all the training tools. Like I can make you sit, I can make you down, there's a consequence for it, this and that, but you still have to do the middle. Like you still have to do it, whether you do it in the middle or whether you do it after the dog goes home, you still have to do that work. And when they see that, hey, this dog is cuckoo crazy and jumping on me, and then just with a few little pointers, the dog winds down. It goes back to kind of what you said, using drive, but then how you can just give those corrections and then start adding the tools, layering the tools during the go home session, and the dog just comes down. That's when it all starts to come together, because when you walk out with a dog, and I have it all geared up with a prong collar and e-collar, and right before he walks through the door, I give it a good level correction, and the dog straightens up, and I put it on a down, it sits there and it's watching them. I mean, that's not real life. That's me manipulating the dog to make me look good. And the goal of this whole thing is not to make me look good. The goal of this whole thing is to make your dog where you can live with them. You know, make your dog where it's a functioning part of society and part of the family and doesn't chase the kids. Know that this dog's been with me a couple weeks and it's so much better and it understands, but it is the exact same dog that came in the beginning. And so I really have made a point to start showing how messy the beginning of go home sessions were, and then what they look like 45 minutes later, you know, where the dog's doing everything they ask. So
for me, when I first started, so I started off training in a facility, but then when I started training on my own, I do go home sessions in the owner's home. And when I first started doing go homes, I was like, this is horrible. Like, I look so horrible. I can't believe this. Like, and every time I remember the same feeling. I would feel so stupid. And obviously, by the time that I left, things were like a lot better, and the owners saw the work through. But what I started doing is like similar to what you're saying, but using that as an opportunity to show the owners how powerful their relationship with their dog is.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like what you said, as soon as you hand that leash to the owner, everything changes. And even more so, the way I'm doing it, where I'm going into the owner's home, as soon as we get into that home, the dog changes because that's that environment where he's a free for all, right? So he's like, yeah, I'm back home, I'm away from that crazy guy. I can do whatever I want again. And it really drills home that point. If you address it, it drills home that point to the owners of like how much their relationship with the dog really matters, how much the environment the dog is in matters, and the way that the dog relates to them right now is very different than the way the dog relates to me. And that gap, and how then we could start to work on closing that gap once they've actually seen it. Like what you said, technically I could walk in the house and pop that leash and correct on the e-collar, and the dog is just going to be like, oops, my bad, and he's going to act like, but like then when I leave, what's going to happen? Then he's going to go
Right.
nuts. And it was kind of like a switch went off in my head. It was like, I'm not doing anything wrong at all by the fact that the dogs are doing this every time we go back to the house. My training is not the problem. Now it's like, let's use this as actually a solution to show the owners the power that they have and how we can bridge that gap. So it's a very powerful thing to see.
Yeah, my first three years of training, I did all the go home sessions in people's houses, and it was so much harder. It took so much more time. I mean, I was easily there 3 hours.
Yeah.
You know, now we knock it out at about an hour, and then we bring them back for that at least second session. But the way I look at it, even with that, is if clients are doing the work, then the go home sessions are almost unlimited. Like if they're working and they're having problems, like you can come back.
Yep.
And there's still times that I have to go to the house because there are problems that the dog will not present for me. Dog gets back home, it's there for a week, 2, 3, and all of a sudden these little things start to rise up again. A lot of time, a big one is reactivity in the neighborhood, because they've done it for so much or for so long, and done it so much. I mean, there's no way to not go there and work them through it.
Yeah, it's again, it goes to that point of showing how strong these what would be the word, like the way the dog affiliates with that neighborhood, the way the dog thinks of that neighborhood, and it's all these patterns that are drilled into it, and where a dog can act perfect with you because it's in this brand new environment, and everything it knows about you is completely different than them, and everything it knows about your environment, whether it's my house or your training center, it's all they know about this is this whole new way of life. But for 6 months, a year, 5 years, however old this dog is, everything's been completely different in that neighborhood. And it's almost like when they get back home, a switch goes off in their head. It's like reminding them of what it's supposed to be in this area. And
Right.
it's a very powerful thing to see. I think that when it's addressed, when it's presented to an owner that way, it helps show them how important it is to change the way the dog thinks of this environment and the way the dog thinks of them. And that like training tools are great and obedience is great and all of these things that are really awesome. It's a very important part of a program. But if you don't change the way the dog thinks of you, if you don't change the way the dog thinks of the environment, and if you don't change its lifestyle, then all of that is kind of just like it's a band-aid, but it doesn't really change anything. The underlying issue is going to still be there.
Yeah, I wish I had time to still do the go home sessions like I used to at people's houses, because they were so powerful, and you could walk the neighborhoods, you can do all this stuff we're hindered at the training center doing. We can overall help more people, and we could, because there's no limit on daylight or times we can be there. We can do a lot more, but I would say the go home sessions at people's houses overall were a better experience for the dog, or a better, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. It was more real. Like when they're in that training environment, they understand we've been coming to this area doing this thing for however many weeks. So it gives us home field advantage. And that's easily transferable to home, but the go home sessions at people's houses I think were really, really good. I do miss that.
Yeah, I think that I never. So the facility that I worked out of before I was doing my own business, but was not primarily a training center. It was a daycare and a boarding facility, and a lot going on there. But I think that a lot of training facilities, and you'll tell me what you think about this, but I think that one of the cons of having a facility as opposed to working out of a house or something like that is that it's a sterile training environment many times. So even though you can replicate a lot of real life, it's still not the same as being in a home with a family, or being in a home when the doorbell rings without you planning it, or when something goes on that is not planned, it's just part of a regular household environment. It's very different than in a training center where you can't necessarily have that. It's like you can replicate it, you could ring the doorbell and plan it, but there's almost like a different energy that exists around that doesn't that's different than when the mailman just comes to the door and knocks on the door.
Right.
And
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, where you still have to do the middle. Like that's the middle. That's the part where even the dog understands that when I ring this doorbell that sounds just like yours at home, the dog knows to go to place now. At home, you're still going to have somebody ring the doorbell and do those repetitions. You still have to do the middle, even though the dog understands what to do. The middle you're not going to be able to leave out doing that middle work.
yeah,
That's where what home is the middle work.
it's pretty amazing how the dogs pick up on these habits, and that like essentially these dogs all come to us already trained. It's just that they're not trained in the way that we want them to be, but
Right.
they're trained by the habits and the patterns of their daily life with the owners. And now it's like we got to repattern them in. I think it's pretty cool to see that the power of habit when you watch a dog, when you watch training.
Yeah, we video everything at the training center. Everything's on a recorded loop. And we have a dog that we can't get it out of this behavior. It keeps doing this weird thing, like cutting in front of you, or whatever this little thing is that we just can't seem to get right. We go back and watch ourselves training the dogs. And what you will see every time is you're doing something. Every time that dog does that thing, he's associating with something you do. And as much as we try not to pattern ourselves or give the dog anything, like we all do these little things, and dogs pick up on those visual cues so fast. And so they know every time that I do this, they can cut behind me. And it may be the way I flip the leash. It may be looking over my shoulder, maybe looking back at them. But every time you'll start to put it together. Every time I do this, the dog does this. And so even as trainers, we get in our behavior patterns too. And even dogs have been with us a week, as little as a week, like they pick up on those the first day.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, we all mammals communicate with our body language, but I think that as humans, we've kind of leaned more towards the verbal communication because it's so easy and we're so used to it that we kind of don't realize how much we're in tune with other people's body language as much. But dogs and animals in general, I guess, but dogs is like, because they don't have that verbal communication, their whole communication is just body language. So the second that they see somebody, they meet somebody, that they're engaging with somebody, they're sizing that person up, everything about them, and they're starting to watch right away for like the different body cues, the way the person's handling things, the way the person's feeling. And before we start even communicating with them, they're already picking up on what we're telling them in a nonverbal way. So those patterns are being created right away. Like you said, it could be something that we do, a weird way that we walk, that like every time we turn a corner, we do some strange thing with our body that we don't even realize, and nobody realizes, but the dog knows every time that happens. And he's picked up on that from before you've ever even tried to start teaching him something new. You've already been teaching him something new with that body language that he picks up on.
Yeah, and we have all the dogs at the training center. We don't keep them put away. They're all in kennels facing the training floor. So they watch us train dogs all day long. And, dogs are amazing at learning passively. So, those dogs, after a little while, they start to pick up on all of this stuff. And it's really cool, but kind of a disadvantage to us. If we kept them put away and then brought them out for sessions, we would have the advantage. But that passive learning is what changes things.
Yeah. And on that note, like what for owners at home who aren't in a training center but are just with their dogs and just trying to work with their dogs, I think an important thing for people to notice is that passive training, meaning like you can set aside 15, 20 minutes a day. Feeding time is a great time. I always tell people to train by feeding time, to do that active training where you teach dogs new things and you teach dogs commands and all that. But then the rest of the day, the dog is being passively trained still. And that's what it's important, is to really notice what you're teaching the dog during that, when you're not doing that 20 minutes a day, like what the dog is learning during that is so important. And like what you said in the training center, and same thing at home, it can be used to the owner's advantage, or it can work against the owner depending on what patterns the dog is picking up on from the owner or from you guys, the trainers in the center.
Yeah, and even in like your house, your personal dogs, like they cue off things you do. My
Yep.
personal dogs, like they're quiet in the mornings until they hear me open a certain drawer to get the things out, my wallet out and stuff. And I don't even get the keys out. They just, as soon as they hear me open that drawer, they start whining because they usually go with me every day, you know?
Yep.
And so those little things that we do, and I don't care how much you try, it's impossible to do things in your home where dogs don't catch on. Like you would have to change your routine every day, and
Yeah.
we're so patterned and routine that dogs pick up on that. And we have to, here we have 5 dogs, and we have to kind of change some of the routines, like their feeding routines and different things, and where we feed them. Because if not, you know, they know about feeding time and they're all there, and it's just too much going on. So we change things up pretty regularly, so they're kind of always guessing on certain things. The last thing you want is a small house with a bunch of dogs and they're all like, okay, let's eat.
Yeah.
Like everybody loses their mind.
Every time I put on my shoes, my Marley, my Roddy, he could be sound asleep. I pick up my shoes to put them on, and he gets up and starts stretching that he's getting ready to go.
Yeah.
And no matter what I do about it, he knows. Like I could do it right now. He's sound asleep. I can put on my shoes, start to tie it, and he'll be right next to me stretching with his neck out, ready to go, that we're going out somewhere. And like you said, like I can't change that. I have to put my shoes on. Either way, I have to put my shoes on. He knows that's the pattern, that's the routine, and it's like he's just picked up on it. It's interesting just to, even if you're not trying to change it, because like I don't really care that he does that. I think it's kind of cute. But even if you're not trying to change it, just to notice those things shows the power of habit, so that if you do want to change your dog's behavior through habit, you can see how powerful it is and start to, like what you said, to rewatch those videos that you have at the center. We don't necessarily have videos going in the house all day, but to watch carefully what reaction your dog has to what behavior that you do, so that you can start to tweak that.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like when something happens, a dog reacts to another dog or a trainer or tries to bite you or whatever else. It's really cool to watch those videos back, and especially if it's a dog that comes after a trainer. And every time you will see what the trainer was doing, whether it was too much leash pressure or what it was. So you think the cameras are going in to watch people, but they're really to say, okay, how can we prevent this thing from happening again? But every time you watch it back, you're like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I've been training dogs for a long time, and I did that thing. But you're able to, I would say, probably one of the most valuable things trainers can do, and even owners. I tell them, video yourself just around your dog. You can get Amazon has a couple really decent $49 cameras. You can put a little card in there, and if your dog keeps doing the same thing in the house, just set it up in a room and forget about it, and then go back and watch what happened just before your.
All right, guys. Hopefully Terry will be back in a minute. We're trying to set it up. So Megan, you got one of those Katie's buckles. I'm really excited that you got it and you liked it, and that I'm happy I posted that video about it, because a bunch of people apparently didn't know about that product and been using them. So I'm happy you got it. Hey, Dan. Guys, don't leave us. Hopefully Terry will be back in momentarily. We're trying to fix this. Let's see if we can make it work. Hopefully. It's always exciting. Love them. Yeah, I love them too. I don't use them on my dogs, but I use them for all my clients' dogs. I have a ton of them. That's all Katie's buckles right there. shout out Katie's Buckles on Instagram. Guys, if you want an awesome product, for any of you who are wondering what I'm talking about, why not? I'll show you guys what it is right now. Do I have one already made? No, but I'll show you guys quickly. So Katie's Buckles is a product on Instagram, and the way it works is it attaches to. Oop! I think we got Terry back.
Wish we had a bunny.
We got Terry back.
Hey, I don't know what happened.
Yay! So exciting.
Glad I
All right,
didn't say
guys,
anything awesome
Terry's
so you could
back.
hear
I
me.
told.
Hey,
Awesome. Dan, you got one of these? Terry, have you seen these? We're chatting here about Katie's Buckles. Have you seen these?
I
You know
have
what
not. I get something similar from Paul Mart, but they're getting harder and harder to get.
Yeah, so Mama Bear, go back to your place, girl. So the problem with the Paul Mark ones that I didn't like about them was that you have the ones with the leather on it.
Yeah, you lose so much of the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one, I'm just talking about it now because Megan in the comments was saying how she got one. I'll show you how this one works quickly, then we can go back to chatting. 1 second.
Yeah, because I get a lot of clients that have a hard time with them. We do
Yeah,
a lot of
that's when I
stuff.
got it. Here, I'm gonna open a prong collar so you can see how it attaches.
We do a lot of stuff with seniors, and they can't get them on and off.
Yeah, so I had a bunch of people with like arthritis and things like that, and they were having such a hard time with it. So here, look, this is very cool. The way it works is you take out the metal plate.
Mm-hmm.
This is for the 2.25. The 3 millimeter is slightly different, but I don't really use bigger collars than 2.25. And then where the metal plate was, you just slide it right into those two holes.
Nice.
And now you don't lose any space really. Maybe at the most you lose one prong, like one link worth. But that's it. And it makes it so easy. And the company that designed these buckles for her is the same company that designed the buckles for e-collar technologies.
Oh, nice.
So they're extremely durable. They're very strong. They've been tested on a bunch. So it's an awesome product. I love it.
And with the other ones, that leather eventually, especially if you have your dog out in the elements, it really starts to wear and dry out. And eventually it fails.
So I've been using these with all my clients. I just send every dog home with one of these instead of the regular, and everybody loves it. It's made life so much easier. So we were just discussing it when you disappeared because I posted a video about it on my page a little while ago so that people should know that a product like that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And so Megan got one and she was saying how she loved it. It's awesome. If you're interested, I can send you the link to it. She's really cool. So anyways, what were we chatting about? We were talking about the power of habits and creating habits and changing habits and all that good stuff.
Yeah, the things we do and video, watch. Oh yeah, we're talking about people getting video cameras in their home and watching what happens just before their dog went crazy or does this behavior. And you will start to notice a pattern of events, usually things you're doing that lead up to that naughty behavior. Yeah.
So there's like, how often do we hear from owners, whether it's online or in person, the dog just bit out of the blue, right?
Right.
And it's like, oh, it's like, no, it wasn't out of the blue. Like it looked like that to you because you weren't watching carefully. You weren't noticing. You weren't in that state of mind to think about what was happening right before. But a dog that bites out of the blue or does any like bad behavior like that out of the blue is so rare. It's extremely rare to have a dog like that. Do they exist? Yeah, sure. But they're not the common dog. It's not the ones that the owners are dealing with on a regular basis.
Yeah, every time that I've been bitten in a training situation, it was my fault.
Yeah, 100%.
Like every time I was, it was I let my guard down. I put too much pressure on the dog. Didn't have, good control of the dog. Pushed the dog too hard. Dog didn't understand what I was asking. Every time it's been something that I've done.
I don't know if you watched when Megan was on this one was on with me here when we were chatting, but she said a story about working with a sea lion and with my sea lion, right?
Yeah.
And she was saying the lesson that she learned from it was that it was her fault. It was her. She took that responsibility on her, not the animal, because she didn't communicate well. And in this situation, like the way we're discussing it, similar idea, but it's that not watching for those signs, not seeing what's happening, not seeing those small changes before the bad behavior happens, that instigated that. And essentially, the end of the day, I think no bad behaviors that a dog does is the dog's fault, right?
Right.
There's always a human involved, because a dog that's just living with other dogs, like in the wild somewhere, that bites another dog is not necessarily a bad dog. They're just communicating, right?
Right.
They're just dealing with things like how dogs deal with things. But as soon as the humans come into play, now it's all our fault. Now it's all our responsibility, and we have to be the ones watching that carefully so that we can know what to do to prevent it by seeing what causes it.
Yeah, and there's a reason that we're legally responsible for our own children until they're 18. Like everything they do is our fault. Like
Yeah.
whether we were there, whether they knew better, like it's mom and dad's fault. It's just the way it is. You have to take that responsibility on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your favorite part about working with, I guess, being a dog trainer, but essentially now my question is more about, like, to you specifically, what do you like more, or do you like working with family pets more than your old thing of working with security dogs?
So the thing with working dogs is kind of the washout rate. You put a lot of time into a dog, and then sometimes it just gets to the point where it stops performing, or you'll get a good prospect, and you think this dog is going to be the new Oreo cookie to dogs. It's going to be like the dog,
Yeah.
and it's just not. Also with client dogs, folks will get a Malinois or a Dutch Shepherd or a German Shepherd or a Rottie, and then they'll want to do bite work, and the dog, doesn't have what it takes. And,
Yeah, I think people
people
don't
don't
realize.
like to hear that. Yeah, it's dogs don't naturally want to bite humans. Very few dogs naturally want to bite humans. You're teaching them bite. It's as a command, just like sit or down. So there's a lot of frustration in that, and as far as working with the public in that. Um, with pet dogs, there's not as much disappointment. I would say the only disappointment with pet dogs is dogs that you put a lot of time into and you have hope for, and they just, they just don't make it.
Yeah.
They end up being rehomed or occasionally put down if it's an aggression case or reactivity case. But in the working dog world, I don't miss that part of it, where you go through just so many dogs trying to find just the few that fit that niche.
And what would you say is your favorite part about being a family pet dog trainer now?
Working with the clients, like you're training people to train dogs every single day.
Yeah.
And I would say the go home sessions are probably my favorite thing. That and doing social media stuff and putting out videos and how to's and making something that seems to be very complicated and is made to seem complicated easy. Clients don't really care, like all of the why a dog's doing these things. Client could care less. The client just wants to know, how do I make my dog stop this? How do I make my dog do this? And that's it. And saying, okay, this is how you do that. Every training session. And I'll say another thing I like about pet dog training is having to problem solve on the fly. It's my favorite thing. It's when we're in a go home session, we're doing something, dog does something weird, owner's like awkward with it and too much leash pressure or keeps spinning around, whatever it is, or just has no rhythm or can't follow instructions, and you're having to break it down to little micro steps and problem solve on the fly. I think that's probably my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. After every go home session, I feel like I've become a better trainer.
Yeah, after go home sessions is when I write things for my next post, because that's when all the good stuff comes out.
Yeah, somebody asked me when I feel most inspired to write, and I was saying the same thing. After working with a client, it's not working with a dog. Like, I can write after working with a dog, and I love writing. I write all the time. But when, like, my best posts, the ones that owners have related to the most, always come after a discussion with an owner, or working with an owner by a go home session, because it's like even though we explain things every single day, and we're usually explaining the same things every day, right? There's not that much to this, right? At the end of the day, it's like, when you know how to train a dog, you can train a dog, and you understand how to problem solve and keep working through things. And essentially, most of the things that you work with, that I work, are usually the same type of stuff on a daily basis, just with a different dog and a different owner. But teaching that to the owner is going to be different every single time because it's a different person. And I think I become a better teacher every time I have to figure out a new way of explaining it, a new way of teaching it. And when I see it click with the owner, it's like, okay, that idea, that way of teaching that idea worked for that owner. I'm sure it can work for somebody else. Let me try to make that into something to share with everyone else.
Yeah, and that's been a real struggle to always keep moving with that. Training dogs for so long, like you just know how to train dogs. And I've worked with other animals, and I've always just been good at it. But when you have to break that down for somebody who doesn't give a crap about dog training, they don't care about behavior, they don't care what's causing it, they don't care about pattern. They just, how do I stop this, or how do I make this happen? And explaining that to them, when you just look at the dog and know, and sometimes you don't really know how you know,
Right.
but you have to think about, okay, why do I know this, and what am I picking up on, and how do I translate that very easily to the client where they retain it. And that's another thing, is retention. Just because you say it at a go home session doesn't mean that they're going to retain it. But when you put that leash in their hand and you're explaining it to them and you're showing them and they're feeling it, then they retain it. So trying to bring all that together, and also not rushing in and just taking the leash and letting them work through it, trying to talk them through it. It has been probably the most challenging part of training, because that's where it all matters.
Right. And with working dogs, you're probably primarily working with the dogs and less with humans. Now it's like, yeah, you train dogs, but you're a teacher. You're teaching people on a daily basis just as much, if not more, than you're working with dogs.
Yeah, and there's, with working dogs, there's a lot of handler work, but the dog is pretty good before that comes into play.
Right.
So there is handler training, but the dogs that are working are bred and conditioned to do that. It's in their DNA. So you have a little bit of an advantage with those dogs. Like the dogs with pet dog training, like who knows what's in their DNA?
Right.
Especially now with all the designer mixed breeds, like
Yep.
who knows with this labradoodle, if you have more lab or more doodle, or if you have the smart end of it or the dumb end of it, like, you don't know. And so you just have to take what's in front of you and make the absolute best of it and communicate that to the client.
Yeah. Then with pet dogs, we have that whole other dynamic of the emotions that come into play, right? With working dogs, again, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd imagine it's pretty straightforward. It's not as much like, there's not as much emotion attached to it because this is a working dog. He has to do a job. People's lives depend on his job many times. Like, it's a serious matter with less emotion attached to it, as opposed to family dogs where it's like everything is emotion. This is our baby. This is our family. Like, he's not just a dog. He's our family member. And there's that whole other dynamic that comes into play that changes everything, with the teaching aspect, with the training aspect, with everything about it.
Yeah, I would say the emotional tie is different. There's a huge emotional tie to working dogs too, because you're with that dog. Rambler, my male Doberman, he is probably the best dog I've ever had. When I walk in, he greets me at the door and he goes and lays down. That's what he does until I call him out. But I've spent 50 hours a week with him for several years, like just him and me. And that's on top of training. So I think the emotional tie to the dog is still extreme, but it's a different type of thing. Like, you're depending on that animal to keep you safe. And that makes a huge difference in the way you relate to that. It's a different relationship. It's still an extremely strong emotional bond, but it's just different. Where pet dogs, it's a happy, make me happy type of thing. Like, oh, make me happy. And so the emotion tied to that is different.
Right.
If I say you want to go to work, or he sees the vest, or if I even grab a handgun and stick in there, as soon as he sees that, his chest goes out and he's like, where are we going? Like, his whole personality changes. I'm in work mode. So the difference in the emotional tie is, I think, the type of emotional tie. I don't think it's any less with working dogs. As far as training them, you're not as attached to them as you're training, but as far as handler, I just think it's just very strong emotional tie, because you have to understand the dog. You're not going to be a handler very long.
I guess the emotional difference between the two is that when it comes to a family dog, I don't know how to put it into words, but maybe it would be like a softer emotion, more of
Yeah,
like,
they're there for your support. They're
right.
there for you to
It's all a
release
feel good,
all of your life's worries on their soul. You know,
right?
they're there for you to pet them when you feel the need. They're there for you to make yourself feel good about their tail wagging. Like, you know, the dog gets all worked up and now I feel good about myself because,
Yep.
hey, my dog likes me. Nobody else likes me. Well, your dog only likes you because you feed it.
Yeah.
Stop feeding your dog. It'll like somebody else.
I
Like
just
whoever's feeding it next.
about a week ago, I met with a family and a dog, and we met up in a park to do a one-on-one. Even though I don't usually do one-on-ones, but because of like everything going on,
Right.
they needed the help right away. So I was like, "We're gonna meet up at a park. We can keep our distance, and I can still work the dog and help you guys get started." So, and this dog was out of control, biting everybody in the family, bit one of the family members while I was right there. It was a lot going on, and I kept on trying to explain to them, like having to show them the severity of the situation because there was so much of that mushy emotion involved that even when they were getting bit, there was that, but he's still our baby and he's still, and like we can't do this to him, we can't do that to him, we don't want to be mean. And I had to really break it down for them that like at the end of the day, you're calling this dog your baby until his meanness, for lack of a better term, like his nastiness towards you gets so strong that you don't care anymore about that, and then he's not going to be yours anymore. And
Right. Then
there's
you'll
that,
find a new baby.
yeah, people get blinded by it. So and one of the kids, and they were asking really good questions, so I was enjoying the conversation a lot because they wanted to understand the why, like, which a lot of owners don't care, but they wanted to understand why to do what I was telling them to do, why it would work. So one, I was telling them like cut down on your affection right now and things like that that are not helping. They're not serving anything here. So the eighth grader in the family, I guess he's 13 years old. He said, "Well, that sounds very cold-hearted, right?" And I explained to them this whole like what I was saying, that eventually it's not going to be their dog. But what it made me realize very strongly is how blinded people can get by their emotions to the fact where they're physically getting hurt, but they're blinded by the emotional mushiness of it all, the feel good aspect, because every dog that bites their owners also has a side that's really loving and sweet, right? And we see that all the time. And that side was blinding them so much to the severity of the situation, where they weren't realizing what was even going on with the band-aids on their hand and everything.
Right.
It didn't matter because this dog was still making them feel good during the rest of the day when it wasn't biting them. There's that.
And I try to take it back to human.
Okay.
So, like, we don't really know what dogs are thinking. We're making our best guess based on research. Like, we really don't know what's in their brain, and we don't know really how they see things. We just, you know, are doing it all based on animal studies and things we found that worked. But you know, even in human relationships, and we can all relate to this, you've seen people in abusive relationships that stay around forever because like the abuse is this much, but the rest of it is good. But they get hurt and all this stuff, and it takes something extreme to bring them out of it. It's the same thing with dogs, except dogs can't communicate and they're fluffy and they're soft, and most of the time those dogs are good until they're not. You know, so humans are human emotion to each other, or relation to each other, is the same exact thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. As trainers, most of us all say not to humanize dogs, but then on the other end of it is like there's so many things that are the same when it boils down to like the basics of it. Yeah, like obviously we have a more emotional intelligence and we take things to a different level, but when it boils down to the very basics of what's going on relationship wise and all of that, it works the same exact way. And you could try to not humanize it as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it works best when it's humanized, just humanized properly.
Yeah, people have to be able to associate it with something. You know, everything a dog does is through association, and most of the stuff humans do is through some type of association too. You go to a bad restaurant and or a good restaurant, and you get sick from a certain meal, you likely don't get that meal because now you associate that meal and that place with being sick. And
Yep.
so if you can help people understand by saying, okay, do you know, have you ever had an addict in your family? And no matter how much you help, they keep going back to the same thing until you say, hey, that's enough. We're not giving you any money. We're not giving you any affection. You can have a place to stay, but these are the rules. Like, that's your dog. That's what your dog is doing to you. You know, that family member, because everybody's had somebody in their family or somebody knows that's been through that. And oh yeah, I know. So you're doing the same thing with your dog. You're an enabler. And they're like, oh, I understand now. So you have to associate it with something that people can relate to.
Yeah. And getting, as trainers, I think the best way that I found for myself to do that, because like what we were saying a little bit earlier, is that now we have to find new ways of explaining the same ideas over and over to different people. What I found helps with that a lot is to get to know the client a little bit outside of their relationship with their dog.
Right.
Like, what is life like for them besides their dog? You know, what is the family dynamic like? What do they do for a living? And if you get like those small clues, just a little bit, you don't need to like delve deep into it. Just having a basic conversation, getting to know somebody, you can right away find a way that's going to easily relate to them on a personal level about what's going on with their dog. Because like if I tell somebody who never experienced, let's say, the addiction thing, like what you were saying, they never experienced it, they never knew anyone, you know, they come from a good straight family and everything is great, that idea might not work. But if I find something that works directly to them in a personal level, that's when it clicks the most, because it almost like triggers an emotion. And when you trigger that emotion, it makes it click for them. That's really what I found works the best, is finding a personal way of making it click for them by getting to know them a little bit outside of their relationship with their dog.
Yeah, I think you're right. I just redid all my training stuff, and on the new training form and contract, it has a lot of those questions. What do you do? Because I would find myself asking people, you know, at the go home session, so what do you do for a living? And it feels like you're prying, but I'm trying to relate it to something, like you said, that you do. If you can find that one thing that you can relate it to, like you said, they buy in. They're like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah, it's making it personal as opposed to just some abstract idea that's supposed to be one size fits all. Now it's like, no, this is directly for you.
Right. That's perfect.
So you've been working with pet dogs for five years, right? Yeah.
Right.
So after 5 years of working with pet dogs, and then a lot of years before that working with dogs in general, what would be one thing that you wished every dog owner knew when they had a dog?
Wow. You should ask me this beforehand so I could prepare.
Yeah, that's the idea. I want to know not what you.
There's a lot. Gosh, I might defer to Olivia to help me with this one.
Yeah, come on, Olivia.
What is one thing? She don't know. She's deferring to.
There's lots of things.
So one thing. Ask me the question again.
What's one thing that you wish every dog owner knew? That if you could like broadcast this everywhere and every dog owner would know that, what would it be?
I would say the power of boundaries.
Yeah.
Like having solid boundaries, you know, going back to the human relation thing. Like, hopefully you don't see somebody in the park, especially now. You don't see someone in the park and you give each other the eye, like, oh, they're hot. Oh, they're hot. And then you run and embrace and start making out. Or in church or wherever, you know, it's like you have boundaries. Even in my marriage, we took a long time to build this relationship, and there's still like boundaries. There's like, you know, I don't get affection when I'm mean to her. And she doesn't get affection when she's mean to me. It's just you're always mean to me. You're not. But you know, boundaries, like setting those boundaries right away.
Yeah, that's such a powerful one. And I like that answer a lot, because what I see the average owner that I work with, and I haven't worked with close to as many dogs and owners as you have yet, but what I've seen time and time again is that people wait to put up those boundaries once it's a little bit too late, once the dog has already crossed them so far, right?
Right.
As opposed to the whole idea of boundaries. If you think about it in like a physical sense, why do you have a fence on a roof? Not because you're scared that not because somebody already fell. You don't put the fence up once somebody's falling. You put that fence up beforehand, and that's a boundary to prevent it. And then you see that fence, and you know, I'm not even going to lean over the edge because I see the fence there. I know that's the boundary I don't cross, because the other side I'm going down. Right. But if you put up a fence once somebody's already jumped off the roof, you're not saving their life. It's too late. right? And I think so many owners wait to put up that fence, that boundary, once the dog is kind of on the other side. And now, like, we can still help it, but now you're going back so much more. And I think that's such a powerful one of knowing how important boundaries are would really change we'd probably see a lot less dogs as dog trainers if people actually understood boundaries.
Yeah, and that's that's the goal of social media. I talk
Yeah.
about boundaries and rules, so much, because that is the key. Having those things you're putting in place to from the beginning to guide the dog in the direction you want them to go, instead of coming in later on. Now you're having to like hold the dog down and say, no, you're going this way, and it's more of a forced act.
Yeah, and if the way that I always explain it in terms of like a new dog, whether it's a puppy or an adult, is like if you have a toddler, right, and you're teaching them about safety, like any good mom or good dad, they're going to put up some sort of boundary. For example, those outlet protection thingies, right? I don't know what to call them, but you're going to put those in there, but you're not going to leave that as the rest of the person's life. Like this kid is 20 years old and he still only doesn't play with outlets because those things are in. You're going to put that in as a boundary to protect him. At the same time, teach that kid that we don't play with outlets because it's dangerous. And you need both. You need that teaching the dog how to make good decisions, but also knowing that because this dog is never going to become a 20-year-old that goes to college and leaves the house and becomes its own person, there is always going to be a level of keeping those outlet things in, of making sure that dog knows there's boundaries that are meant to be kept to, because there's only so far you're going to get when it comes to educating a dog as opposed to educating your toddler and having them grow up to be an adult.
Yeah, that safety net, no matter how good my dogs are, if we didn't have a fenced yard, like eventually they would wander to the neighbor's yard.
Right. Absolutely.
Like dogs, like they're curious. They're like, oh, what's this over here? It may not be today, may not be next month, but there's going to be something over there that's worth it to them.
Yep, and that's that physical boundary that you're putting. They can clearly see it, and boundaries. I want you to touch on a little bit when you said setting boundaries. So for somebody, let's say somebody's just tuning in who doesn't know what that means to them, like, does that mean setting up a fence? What does that boundaries look like?
It could be. So it could be anything. So boundaries are rules. Boundaries are things to give your dog a clue as to what's going on. Boundaries are don't bite my hand. There's a consequence. There's a boundary. There are clear things around me. We use a physical boundary that we use a lot in training. So we use a lot of visual things in training. And we'll take a long lead and make an arc in front of a couch. And that's a boundary. Like, you just don't cross it. You teach the dog to wait. Personal space is a huge boundary. You just can't come and get affection anytime you want. With 5 dogs in our house, if they come to all get affection at one time, like, there's not enough air in the room for all of us. Like, they suck it all out of the room. So it's just keeping those rules in place, not rushing out the door. Boundaries are nothing but rules. When we get new dogs and we get especially puppies, the first thing we want to do is hold them and let them fall asleep on our lap. And right from the beginning, that is like violating boundaries. You can turn them into a couch dog later, but breaking that chain of behaviors is extremely hard. So it's better in the beginning, right from day one, to say, okay, you're going to sleep in your crate. Because the only reason we're allowing those rules and boundaries to come down is because it makes us feel better. Same with human relationships. If we let our boundaries down in relationships and let somebody in, it's usually because we need something, not because there's value there. It's because we're selfishly needing something from that person, and we just accept them really quickly. And so having that personal space, that arm's length with dogs in the beginning, especially in the beginning, is important. If you want to let those boundaries down, just like you do in human relationships, as the dog gets older and you become more comfortable with things, then by all means do that. But in the beginning, have those rules in place. My house, my rules, my life, my rules, my space, my rules.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said that I like a lot is, if you want, like, what we usually do is let those boundaries down too early, like that puppy coming home and falling asleep on our lap. And what I find a lot of owners struggle with, like one that I see is very common, is I don't want my dog to jump on people, but I love when it gives me hugs, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, to the dog, it's all the same. So first set that boundary and then let it know when it can cross that boundary with permission.
Right.
But if there is no boundary in the first place, he's never going to ask for that permission to cross it. He's not crossing a boundary if the boundary hasn't been set, right? If there is no property line, you're not going to someone else's property. It's just land. So to the dog, it's all just like there's just all this stuff, and it's your job to slowly separate it and then give the dog that permission of when it can cross over and when it can't, only once you've actually set up that boundary in a real way that it understands it. Until then, it's all the same to the dog. He's just being a dog.
Yeah. Once you allow that dog to do something over and over again, now it's just a normal part of their day.
Yep. That
Like,
becomes
it's just what I do. Why does my dog jump on me every time I come in? Because it's jumped on you from the time you've gotten the dog. Very rarely at the training center, even new dogs, do they jump on me.
right.
Very rarely. I don't care. Our dog's here for jumping. Very rarely do they jump on me because I don't allow that. I don't allow them to get in that space. And I usually meet them if they're coming toward me. And they're like, "Whoa, nobody's ever done that before."
Right.
And then I don't give them anything. I don't say a word to them. I don't touch them. And if they jump on me once, they don't do it again because I give them nothing of value in return.
Right. And from the moment that you come into their life, there are boundaries, and that relationship is built with those boundaries. So the dog's not even like he feels like he can't jump on you. It's that like he knows that's not part of the relationship with you. That's just not how you guys got to know each other. So it wouldn't even make sense to do.
Right. And that's why trainers can take dogs through training so fast, because as soon as they walk into our place, slip lead goes on, they're taken right from the owner, put into a let out run, go to the bathroom, come in, kennel, start training.
Right.
Like
And
they don't know any different. They're not upset. They're not sad. They're not having withdrawals. They're like, we're doing this. They adapt probably within 6 hours.
yeah,
By the second or third session, they just get out and they're like, okay, ready to go. There are a few exceptions, but not many. But the great part about that is we can get dogs through this process a lot faster than going to the house every day and them going an hour here, or actually 15 minutes of dog training, 45 minutes of human interaction, and then see you next week. But that's why with board and trained stuff, and why I love it so much, is we can take that dog through structure and boundaries to a new place so fast that it's amazing.
Yeah, we cut down on, because we're building a new relationship with the dog, essentially, no matter how much dog trainers want to say that they're just training, not having a relationship, but we're building a relationship with that dog, but it's all based on these boundaries that are there. It's like we cut away all of that time that it would take for the owner to start redoing things and putting those boundaries up and having the dog fight against them because it's not used to it. It's just, this is how it is from now on because I'm a new person and this is how I do things. It's a very different dynamic than when, like, back to what I was saying, the pros and cons of one-on-ones versus board and trains is that you don't get that in a one-on-one.
Right. And the key word you just said was building a relationship. And that's something that's left out of a lot of programs, especially larger programs, is we still, like that dog, and it goes back to the working dogs and building drive. Like we have to have some type of working relationship with that dog. It's just different. Now, as the dog earns my respect, the dog's doing what it's asked to do, and it happens very quickly. Like we have playtime, we play tug, and we throw the ball. But you have to earn all of that, We have free playtime, we have social time. So all of that is building into the relationship that we're having with the dog. So the training aspect and teaching dogs to sit and heel and all that stuff is probably 2/3 of training. But the final third, or the beginning third, the beginning, middle, end, all of it. Just about 1/3 of the training is building that relationship with the dog. When we get fearful dogs in, or even aggressive dogs, a lot of what we're doing is just I'm hanging out with the dog.
Yeah.
Teaching the dog a little bit of pressure, like just a little bit. And even if I give pressure and the dog looks at me, that leash pressure goes away. Like just acknowledge me is all I'm asking. And so all I'm doing, you can't rush those dogs through. Like all I'm doing in the beginning, especially with fearful dogs, it's just starting to build that relationship, build that trust, And it's a super important part that's left out of a lot of dog training and a lot of, especially on social, you don't see much about relationships. It's all A, B, C, D. This is what you do to get this dog to do this. And if you don't have a relationship with the dog, it's so much harder.
Yeah, when I first started training, on day one, I would put a prong collar and an e-collar on the dog right away, right into it. Hendrix, you got to go place, bud. Go. And on day one, I would put a prong collar, put an e-collar on the dog, and that was it. Start introducing him to the tools right away. And I got results, obviously, but it wasn't the same as and it didn't last in the way I wanted it to for the owners once they went back home, because of like a lot of what you were discussing of relying on the e-collar too much and using it like a remote control and all of that aspect to it. Where what I started to do is I shifted the way I did everything. Now when a dog comes in, I usually don't put a prong collar on them till like day 4 or 5, maybe, sometimes longer. And the first day that they're with me, we don't work. We hang out. Like, it's very, and I don't mean like we're playing and the dog is jumping with me and like we're hanging out. No, it's like if I'm sitting here on the computer, I have the dog with me, and all I do is with leash pressure, every time he pulls away from me, I bring him back to me, right?
Right.
And we simply just start to do those small things, basically changing the way the dog lives from day one. Because I think that most of the behavioral issues didn't stem from not knowing how to sit or not knowing how to go to place, right? And most of the behavioral issues came from not knowing how to live and not knowing how to just chill. And when you start to change that part about a dog and then bring in the commands and then bring in the tools, it's all so much more powerful. Like now the dog's mind knows how to just exist, just be, just live. And then you add in everything else to it as to complete the picture. It's a much more full picture for the dog than just saying, here's some 5 commands that you got to do whenever you're told to do them, and that's it. It's like, but what do you do in between that? And I find that if I teach the in between that part right away and start to introduce that as this is just how you live now, everything else kind of fits together so much better. The puzzle works so much better.
Yeah, I think we don't get into, I don't even start saying the word really heel or sit probably until day 4 or 5. And I use sit because every dog pretty much knows how to sit, so it's a good layering place to build on. But it's the same thing. Like when the dogs go home, they need to be good when they're not doing anything. That's kind of the point. Most dogs that come to us know how to sit and lay down, like they do. And so what you're doing, just building that relationship, and you're teaching the dog pressure. You know, the thing with working dogs that can relate to is, I want my dogs, I'm the center, excuse me, spit on myself. I'm the center of their world. Yeah. I want them to look at me for absolutely everything. You know, we can be in a crowd of people, we can be in a dog park full of dogs, and my dogs will not stop looking at me. You know, no matter what we do, if I move, they move, I stop, they stop. Now they go dogs, but if they look at them and don't see me, they're trying to find me. Like, okay, where is he at? And that's what we're doing with the pet dogs. Like, everything you need in this place, rely on me, and I will guide you through this, and everything will be great. Don't look to me, and everything out here is going to be pressure. It's going to, you have to move toward me to be in the place of 100% grace in your life. It needs to be me, not my treats, but me as a person. I move, you move, I stop, you stop. We go through the whole heel process without saying a word. Like, we're just using leash pressure and positioning. You know, I want the dog's smart enough to look at me and know when I stop, if you keep going, there's going to be pressure. If you're too far back, there's going to be pressure. You don't have to say a thing. Then once the dog starts following you around, just call it heel. Like, and the dog already knows how to do that. So I think what you're doing by just bringing them in and just having that time with them is huge. It makes a big difference in how the dogs end up.
Yeah, I've seen a big difference in it when I changed that. And I always tell people, like, I think that, and again, like, commands are so important. I don't want people listening to this to think that commands aren't important.
Well, absolutely. We have to have a way to tell the dogs what we're asking them to do.
Right. But I think that you can have an extremely well-behaved dog without it knowing any commands if you live with it properly. And I think that that's the part. So, like, when I first started learning dog training, I was taught by a very old school, I guess, compulsion-based trainer. And his way of training was, we just teach obedience, right? and there was no lifestyle to it. And I saw a lot of dogs that he worked with were really, really good when they were doing obedience,
Right.
but not when they weren't. And because he was only focusing on that and not like what the rest of the day looked like, it was missing that. And I think if you focus on what the rest of the day looks like primarily, you you don't necessarily need a lot of the commands. Should you teach them? 100%, right? And they're an important thing. And like dogs should know certain basic things. It's just going to make life easier for you and for the dog. But you can have a really well-behaved dog and then just add those things in on top of it to perfect it.
Yeah, and that's you're exactly right. We get a lot of dogs that are, we're in Tennessee, so duck hunting is really big here. Arkansas, we get a lot of bird dogs, hunting dogs, that are amazing hunters, but they come in the house, destroy stuff, pee on everything, and the belief is that you can't have this and this.
Right.
But you absolutely can. Send them off to hunting training and let them learn to hunt, and then, gosh, bring them in and we'll teach them how to be good. Dogs are very versatile. My working dogs are as good at house dogs as they were working dogs. They're in the house with us. They're not in pens outside. They have to live and coexist with us. People come over, they're all trained to bite, and they're really good at it. But when people come over, they're just dogs. And so dogs can adapt really well to what you're asking them to do.
And that's the whole idea of that switch that we talk about, is like whether it's going from being a working dog, like out in the field hunting or biting people, to coming home and laying down and just being chill house dog, or it's like going out to the park and running around and swimming and playing fetch and then coming back home and relaxing. It's the same thing. It's like installing that on off switch where the dog knows like what mindset is appropriate for what situation. And I think that a lot of, I worked with one dog that was a hunting dog. So I'm in the city, so we don't have like, that's not the regular thing, but there was one that she would go to hunting and upstate New York and then come back down here with the family. And that was the big thing that they were concerned of, is like, if I teach the dog how to relax, is it going to still know how to hunt? And that's the missing thing, is like, yeah, like you said, you could have both, and you should have both. And dogs should know how to be crazy, and they should know how to have fun. They should know how to be wild, because most of us pet owners or dog owners love to see that side of our dogs, but that's not what most of the day is going to look like. And you got to have that balance, that on off, essentially.
Yeah, I call my Dutch Shepherd. She's, I think, 3 now, but I call her the best, worst dog I've ever had. Like, she's amazing. Like, I taught her disc stuff. Went out with some disc people, and there was a little more to it than I thought. And they're like, "We need to teach her to do this." It took like 20 minutes. And she's like coming around me, leading out, all this stuff. But I know her hang-ups. And so there are no toys in the house, 0 toys. Like, when you come in the door, my house, like, I don't want that. You're not going to chew. Now, when she was a little puppy, she had things to chew on, you have to keep her entertained. She's grown now. And this is how you act when you come inside.
Right.
But out in the field, like bite work, detection work, running in the woods, like, she is as cuckoo crazy as any Dutch Shepherd you will ever see. And people are like, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong with your dog?" And like, she,
What you want, though.
Right. Like, she took some, really amped up drugs before I brought her out. She's like drooling and just like, "What is this thing?" The eyes are popping out of her head. And then she comes in, the training center or whatever, and goes in the office and just lays down and goes to sleep. Like, past a certain point in the training center, no toys are left out. When she comes past this is where you turn off, and she'll just lay there until I call her out to help me with a training session. These are the rules. Like, my house, my rules. You can't act like that.
When I saw it really strongly, so when I was first learning about dog training, I went out to a guy in Jersey and did a bunch of bite work where I was basically just taking bites, and it was a lot of fun. I had a great time with it, but I was with a whole group of like students who were learning about dog training and stuff, and the guy in charge was kind of like a ranch, and he had like a bunch of dogs and a huge training setup with like blown out cars to practice all the different scenarios and all that. And we're sitting in a field, and he's like, "All right, I'm gonna go get the dogs." And he opens the door, and they all come running out. And like, in my mind, I'm expecting like these vicious dogs to come running out because they're bite dogs, right? So like, I never been around it in real life. I've just watched videos of it.
Right.
I'm expecting these like vicious dogs to come running out, and like they came running towards me, and I like kind of took a step back. And he's like, they're not working now. They're just pets.
Right.
The dog like lay down on its back, getting belly rubs, playing, and 2 minutes later, like it went into work mode. It saw the sleeve and it became the scariest dog. Like I would never want to get bit by the
Right.
dog. Right. And it was a very cool thing to experience it firsthand, though, of really seeing that power of association and how much you really could teach a dog that on off. These dogs were living in the house with little children, being a part of a family life. And then once they're out in the field and they're in that work mode, it's like you stay back. They're scary dogs. And they went from being the goofiest on their back playing dogs to like, you don't mess with this dog because he's scary. And he was using his teeth in every way that he possibly could. And it was a very cool thing to experience firsthand.
Yeah, and we worked really hard on after the dogs did their bite stuff, the decoy being able to touch them. It was really important to me because they're going to be around so many people. When we were working, the chance of somebody coming around a corner, walking up and touching the dogs is extremely high.
Right.
And they're just dogs at that point. And so on decoy work, after bite work, like the decoy would be able to hang out with the dogs and pet the dogs. You know, it took a while to get there in the beginning, probably for the first year, that was not the case. Every time they saw a person, like, hey, can I bite this person? But then after you really work on it and the dog understands, that's definitely that switch on and off.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. We're going to wrap this up. It's been about an hour, including our technical difficulties.
Yeah,
so
sorry about that.
That's all right. So tell people where they can find you online, on social, how they can find you if they want to work with you. Where are you at?
We're in Memphis, Tennessee. Facebook, West Tennessee Canine. Instagram, West Tennessee Canine. And YouTube, West Tennessee Canine or Terry Harris. Either one. You'll find me on that. We have
Your YouTube channel is pretty nice.
What's that?
Your YouTube channel has a lot of great content.
It's getting there. It's probably the most efficient, but YouTube has been the challenge as far as keeping the content up and good content. There's so much good stuff on YouTube, like really good stuff.
Yeah.
But we're pretty happy with it. Oh, and my website too. Thank you. My wife just reminded me because she's amazing. Is WTNK9.com. And I have a lot of information on there and all the links to all my social, everything. And I have a lot of how-to stuff actually just on the website so people can, train their dogs just there.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So, and if anybody wants to find Terry's info, I'll post up the links in the comments once this is up. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
All right.
Love
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Terry. This was a lot of fun. For everybody at home, stay safe, stay kind, be gentle to each other. Love you all.
All right. Thanks. See you later.